Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 335, and I had a conversation with Nader Hanna. I met Nader at the Magic Castle after his performance. He's a magician, mentalist, hypnotist, and theologian. It's quite a combo. We discuss Coptic Orthodox Christians, the history of mentalism, hyper-hypnotic states, books, adventures, and more. It was a really great conversation. In other news, I saw the new Aubrey Plaza film, Emily the Criminal, and it is fantastic. Usually, I think she plays characters that are similar to her own personality, but she really shows her acting chops in this film. Highly recommend it. And in sad news, we lost the lovely and hilarious Leslie Jordan. He was an incredible bright spot in this world, and a few of my friends were actually really close with Leslie, so it's an extra sad time. But the way he lived his life, he treated all as a friend and confidant, and he certainly made everyone's lives better during the pandemic with his hilarious videos on Instagram. It's sad when such bright lights are taken from us, but he's one of those folks I feel like will live on forever in our hearts, for sure, in our memories, but just in the incredible body of work that he left for us. I wanted to mention him because for me, he certainly helped me through some dark moments during the past few years. Humor is certainly, that is the medicine, right? All right, business stuff. Check out heyhumanpodcast.com for links to learn more about my guests and the show. Go to susanruth.com to learn more about me personally, and you can follow my Instagram, Susan Ruthism. There's also a Hey Human Podcast Instagram. I'm on social media all over the place under Susan Ruthism, so you'll find me pretty easily. Find my albums on Apple Music, on Spotify, or wherever you get your music. My most recent record is All I Ever Wanted Was Everything. Also, check out my new relationships and sex show, Are We There Yet?, with sexologist and healthcare practitioner Mara Edelman. That show is on YouTube, youtube.com/Are We There Yet podcast show. Are you digging the ad-free Hey Human podcast? Would you like to support the show? Please rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Reviews really help, and subscribing really helps the algorithm, so definitely do that and show your support for the show. Okay, be well, take care, be love, be light, especially in these dark times upon us. Be the love that we wish to see in the world, yeah? All right, here we go. Nader Hanna, welcome to Hey Human.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Nice to have you over to the homestead.
Yeah, I love it. It's great. I was so taken back by all the wonderful art.
Oh, thanks. I do love art. Welcome. We met not too long ago at the Magic Castle.
Yes.
I actually was waiting for the person that was coming on after you, John Slicer. I was there to see him and his performance. It's called a performance still, even though it's, right? Is magic considered a performance?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And so I sat in on yours, and I just thought, wow, this guy's really good.
Oh, you're so kind.
And there was something that your friend said when he stood up and said, I don't think people realize that my friend, not only 2 people in the world know how to do this, and then you went and did mentalist-y type stuff, and I couldn't tell. It looked like you were not quite sure that he was going to say that. It looked like it surprised you.
It was a bit of a surprise. You know, it's funny. It's happened now a few times in the middle of my routine where a friend who's a magician wants to point to the fact that what the audience is probably seeing is not what they think they're seeing. And he wanted to give them a little bit more feedback, and that some of the things that I do or I choose to do as a mentalist is more of a skill-based as opposed to a trick. And I think that's who was trying to impress upon the audience that was the case.
How do you mean? What's the difference? I mean, a trick is a skill, is it not?
That's a good question, actually. So tricks are more, let's just say tricks are more reliable, right? So a magician doing a trick, generally he's working on a very deceptive line, right? The line is The trick produces the method, and the method creates the execution of the effect, right? And I choose, my show, I do a hypnosis show as well. So hypnosis, although in the past it's been called a parlor trick, right? It's not a trick as far as what a magician would say it's a trick. It uses a certain, I guess magicians view tricks as very differently than what maybe someone outside the magic community would view a trick. So, for example, to me, a trick constitutes something that has a method, and the method is a deceptive one, other than what you are actually trying to create the effect of. So, if I tell you, for example, this ball is going to vanish from this hand and reappear in this hand, well, the trick executed the effect. But it's a trick because that's not the reality. But if I say, for example, you're going to think the directions of where I need to go, and I will interpret your mind's subtle responses to that thinking, well, there is no trick there. I'm literally doing what I'm saying I'm doing, outside of outside of the known method trick that a magician would employ to produce it. For example, a magician might produce that effect in a very different way. He might actually employ a confederate or a stooge in the audience who would secretly code them, or might have a hidden camera somewhere, or maybe perhaps the object that gets hidden has some sort of electronic receiver, so they're not actually employing an actual skill. It's more or less they're theatrically acting the role and not interpreting the brain signals or the nervous signals that are coming through the brain.
I just assumed that the magician is picking up on subtle movements or subtle actions of the person that's leading them.
Yes, and that's the other thing. Is that a trick? That's where the definition of a trick might differ.
That seems like a skill more than a trick.
It's a skill. That's exactly right. Yeah. And I think that's what my friend was trying to impress.
Yeah.
That it's a skill. And to execute that reliably in a show where there's a lot of pressure.
And with people trying to trick you.
And with people trying to trick you. And not cooperating and being maybe a little drunk. It requires a lot of drunk. It requires a high degree of sensitivity that is seldom found. But I was able to train myself to do this. And I believe that that's what my friend was trying to just sort of impress upon the audience, because he is in awe of it, as many magicians are. Most magicians rely on tricks. Not that there are methods that are a little bit more subtle, but those subtle methods they won't do in a show, because a show needs to be successful, needs to be reliable. The tricks have to work in order to make the show a successful show, magic show, right? It wouldn't be a good show if the magician's constantly failing, right? So in regards to the fact that I choose to do something that requires a high degree of sensitivity and actually saying what I'm doing, and I choose to do that as my show, it's a pretty risky thing for any magician to do, but I've developed a high degree of sensitivity that I feel confident in doing it in every show and succeeding.
Would you say that then you were literally picking up on people's brainwaves?
Well, that's the question. Here's the funny answer. My belief is, this is my honest belief, is when a person thinks about something hard enough, their brain will send a signal throughout their body. That signal is so subtle, most people can't pick it up naturally. There are people who can get visual cues, right? Like if someone's lying, nervous responses will start happening, right? Their hands will start sweating. They might exhibit certain eye movements of deception. Directional cues, like mental directional cues, in order to pick that up, you have to have a high degree of sensitivity. The funny thing is, I'm not actually feeling for anything. That's the weird thing. Once you get very sensitive, you don't feel. You actually just know where to go. And it's hard to define that. I think this is the first time I've ever defined it for someone, because I've told magicians this is the actual truth, because it can be done without contact.
Yeah, because you held so just to let the audience know, there was a group sitting at the front of the room that were all buddies. Obviously, they were pretty tipsy, I think.
Yeah.
And you went out of the room with a couple of them as your guard. And the woman that had been chosen to hide an object, she went and hid it somewhere. And then you were to come back in and find where she had hidden it by asking another person in her group to not say a word, but to think the direction of where the object was.
That's correct.
And that you were to then pick up that and then be able to find the object. And it was interesting because when you had left the room, they had all decided collectively to make you think that they had put it in the corner that you were drawn to immediately.
Yeah.
That they all collectively had decided that. And so, the woman that was to direct you, not by speaking or anything, just by thinking, you were definitely all over the place, in that area.
Yeah.
And then you said, I think, this isn't really working. And I was like, I'll do it. So my hand popped up. Yeah. Because I was like, I want to see how it works. Why would this is my biggest frustration with people that go to magic shows is that they're somehow trying to out magic or outsmart or whatever. It's like, just, you know what, just do the thing. You're here to enjoy and be a part of something. It's a communion. It's an agreement, if you will, between the person that's doing the thing for you and the person that's watching the thing. Anyway, and I wondered, because you held onto my wrist, but I faced you. And you were facing the direction of the audience. I was facing you. And I thought, well, I'm going to think exactly where I know the object is. Mm-hmm. But I wondered, after the fact, I was like, I wonder if I was making subtle movements. But you said something afterward. You came up and you said, thank you for being so open and thinking so strongly. And I thought, well, that's a very interesting thing to say to someone if you were, it could be part of the shtick. But it felt very real that when you said that to me. I felt like, I thought, this guy I think he actually picks up on stuff separate then. And then I thought, well, maybe you didn't have to hold my arm, which is why I found you later and said, could you have done that without holding on to me? And you said, yes.
Yes. So it can be done without contact. The contact is faster. That's the honest truth. The contact is faster. Without contact, I can still find it, and even the same speed, and I could narrow it down to the one location if it's a good sender. Sometimes it's hard to know if you have a good sender. It's the first time actually that I found out that what you just told me. I didn't know that they were collectively wanting to mess with me.
I don't think even they knew that they were all giving, and I very much believe in energetic thought, very much so. And so I was sitting in the back, and they were all in the front row, and I thought, well, shit, every single one of these 4 or 5 people is trying to make you go in that direction.
Yeah, which I did.
Which you did.
So I knew, the funny thing is, there's a signal I get when I know I'm in the right location. Like, this is the location the person's thinking, this is where it is. And I got that very strongly with the first candidate. And when I wasn't there, and then I realized she's sort of messing with me or leading me astray, the only out really is to sit her down and seek out another sender. Because it is dependent on the sender, right? So in your case, you were honest. You said, I'm going to think exactly where it is, because I know where it is. And I'm not going to try to mislead you or misguide you, and I want this to succeed. And I thank you for that, because that's all that's required, really, for success.
Absolutely. And it's a cool trick to observe. I mean, I don't want to keep calling it a trick.
It's an experiment.
Like more experiment, yeah.
I call it an experiment or a demonstration.
Where are you from, and what got you into being a mentalist and you're a master hypnotist?
I'm a hypnotist, hypnotherapist.
Yeah. So what got you into that stuff? So let's start with, where are you from?
Sure. I was born in Egypt, in Cairo. My family is Coptic Orthodox Christian.
That's the people you see sometimes, listeners. That's with the all black, and they've got the kind of the rounded squarish hat and and they've got the long cross around their neck. Yeah.
Wow, you're very astute.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. The Orthodox Church goes back to the time of Christ. Mark, the gospel writer, apostle, he left Jerusalem, came to Alexandria, and converted people to Christianity And so I come from those converts. So my family left Egypt because Egypt, it's a wonderful country, just not the most hospitable for minority groups. And Christianity, the Christian minority group is the largest in that country, they make up about 10% of the people in Egypt. So we left in the early 90s, and then my family came here, and I've lived in the United States ever since. And my father was an amateur magician, and that's what got me into magic. He showed me a card trick when I was about the age of around 7 or 8. I can't remember if I was 7 or 8. I remember it was around then because it was shortly after we came, and I would do those cards. Like I hadn't. So by the way, I was a very late talker when I was a kid. In fact, when I was an infant, this is going to be kind of taken down a very weird path, but in fact, when I was an infant, I sort of died. I stopped breathing, and my eyes rolled back, and the doctors were able to resuscitate me. And
so your family had to bring you into the emergency, and
correct. Yeah, my mom found me
like a SIDS situation.
SIDS, exactly. I had a sudden infant death syndrome.
Terrifying
situation, and luckily we were very close to the hospital. So my mom grabbed me and ran with me to the hospital. They revived me, and they thought that maybe mentally I wouldn't be able to, because I had lost oxygen for a period of time to my brain. So they thought perhaps I may have. What's the word I'm looking for? A mental handicap of some kind.
Sure.
And I sort of did, actually. I was a very late talker. I started talking only when I was like 4 or 5. Like I'd only say a few words. And so when we came here, I didn't really, my Arabic was pretty not the best. And then, I was barely trying to learn English, and I was very confused, and I had really no friends, and I got picked on and all that stuff. And those card tricks made me feel different, and allowed me to present something to kids that attracted them to me, and I felt special, and so those card tricks were really, in a weird way, they were they were a tool, just for me to, make friends, really. And I remember I exhausted all my dad's card tricks, all the ones he knew, and then like a relative friend of ours. Another person in the Coptic community bought me a magic book, and it was.
They didn't think that was devilish.
No, it's funny. Some people do. Some people look at it that way. In Egypt, they call magic sleight of hand. It's called in Arabic. It literally, there's no word. Magic is like sorcery, black magic. Like that sort of thing, like sorcery or divination. But in Egypt, the artistic, theatrical expression of like sleight of hand is what they call it, or sleight of hand. It's just known by that.
Also, there's magicians in the Bible.
Correct, but even those people are sorcery, right? They're related to sorcery. But in Egypt, so someone who does theatrical presentation of mystery, they just say it's sleight of hand. And so he bought me a magic book. It was called The Klutz Book of Magic.
Klutz?
Klutz, yeah.
As in, whoops.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Actually, they had a whole series. The Klutz, they had a Klutz book on juggling.
That's almost like dummies, the dummies.
Yes. That's actually, I think it was prior to the dummy series.
That's
was
just
the
funny
Klutz
that
books.
It's Klutz.
Yeah, they're a Klutz. I kind of like the word klutz better than dummy.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, I think it's actually older than the dummies books.
Oh, I'm sure. Do you want another lemon drop? You good?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay.
So yeah, he got me that book. I did every trick in that book. It came with like magic props and stuff, and that was cool. And then
it must have been thrilling.
Yeah, it was really cool. Like I felt more professional
and seen. I'm sure you felt seen.
Yes, that's the best way to put it. Because when you don't really fit in, you feel like no one's paying attention to you, and you can't really, and you're not being seen. Exactly, that's a good way to put it. So yeah, I was being noticed now, and I did magic all the way up until high school, and then around high school I dropped it. I started getting really religious. And like around 16, I wanted to join a monastery right out of high school.
Wow.
Yeah, a Coptic Orthodox monastery.
Was that family influence, or did you come to that of your own volition?
I came to that out of my own volition.
Okay.
Yeah. It was 9/11.
Oh, wow.
That sort of spawned, or I would say was the catalyst.
Interesting. Did you get a lot of people looking at you sideways?
It wasn't even that. It was, although there was obviously animosity towards
anyone with dark skin that looks like you, of course.
Correct.
Yeah.
Anyone from that region.
Yeah.
You were put into this category of Muslim terrorist.
Right.
But it wasn't even that. It was, you know what it was? It was something. I was a very innocent kid, and 9/11 took away my innocence. And I started seeing that the world is a lot more evil and a lot more sinister than I was led to believe. So I sort of had like this weird moment where I tried to find the solution to evil. And I looked into religion. And I remember, growing up in the Orthodox Church, we're brought up in the church, and so you always have these things in the back of your head. And I wasn't religious. I wouldn't even, I'd go to Sunday school, but I wasn't very attentive. Like, I didn't even read the Bible or anything.
And your family also not as into it? They were just run-of-the-mill, the way most Christians are?
I would say, run-of-the-mill. We'd go to church and pray.
The high holidays and things?
That sort of thing. Yeah, we'd be more frequent. Yeah, but it was still, I wouldn't say we were uberly religious or anything. But it's just all kind of, to me, religion was something I started to look into because of 9/11.
As an antidote to evil.
As an antidote to evil. That's a good way to phrase it. Jeez, you're good at phrasing, too. I can see why you're a writer. We grew up watching these old VHS tapes of the church martyrs. Because so you've probably heard that the early Christian church suffered extreme persecution.
Sure.
Under the hands of the Romans and the Mamelukes and the Berber and all these people that...
And there were so many religions fighting it out to be the one that was...
The dominant. Correct.
There's a great book about that called Zealot. I recommend for anyone who wants to read it.
Zealot.
It's a great book.
I don't think I've read that. I have to check it out. But the Christians in Egypt, they suffered a lot of persecution. They were an easy target. They didn't fight back. They were... if you notice, a lot of the Orthodox Christians, they're very, they're more pacifist. We don't, if any of us engaged in war we were constricted, or, I forgot, I don't know how to say the term, but essentially taken into the Roman army to serve. But we held fast in the faith. So if the Roman governor in Alexandria, for example, said, okay, you now can't worship this Jesus, now you have to worship Artemis, and they made it law, we would oppose it and still worship Jesus, and a lot of us were persecuted and beheaded. So the church prides themselves on having a lot of these early church martyrs that were killed for their faith. And one of them was, I remember I popped the video in, it was of an 18-year-old by the name of Mina the martyr. And I remember I was watching the video, and it just spoke to me because Mina was told he was a soldier in the Roman army, and he was told that the Roman governor said Christians now have to worship a Roman pagan god, and no longer can they worship anything else, and he refused. And so he fled his service, and he went into the desert. So early Christian monasticism started in Egypt. So a lot of early Christian Egyptian saints were known to be desert dwellers or hermits. And so he led a monastic life, an ascetic monastic life in the wilderness. And then the story goes that an angel of the Lord came to him and said, "It is time now to receive your crown of martyrdom. And you will go and profess your faith to the governor, and he will torture you, but God will stand with you and heal you and cause many people to come to faith, and then you will receive your crown of martyrdom and be beheaded." And he received, and the angel said you are going to receive 3 crowns, one for your celibacy, because he was a virgin, one for your asceticism and monasticism, and one for your martyrdom. And And I don't know, something about that video at that moment struck a chord with me. And I remembered my parents would take us to a monastery in the 90s. Well, it's still around, actually. It's the first Coptic monastery outside of Egypt, here in California, called St. Anthony's Coptic Monastery, and just past Barstow in a town called Newberry Springs or Yermo. They keep changing it. I don't know why. Sometimes it's Yermo, sometimes it's Newberry Springs. They can't make up their mind. But so I started going to that monastery again, and I fell in love with the monastic life. I would go on spiritual retreats, and when you go on spiritual retreats, you're getting a taste of what it's like to be a monk.
You say you loved monastic life. Did you feel then a deep calling and connection to Jesus, to God?
Absolutely.
That's an unusual thing for a teenager.
Very, for a 16-year-old, right?
Sure.
I guess I was always unusual. I don't know. This is the best way to describe it. I was pretty unusual already as a kid.
You'd already had your first sacrifice by dying as a baby.
I guess you can say, yeah. I guess you can say maybe perhaps.
That might have marked you as special.
Perhaps. I don't want to say special or anything, but
no, special's okay.
Different. I guess I was very different.
I wonder if that does something to you. You know what I mean?
I think it does. I think it does something to you. I don't know what it is, but
I think it gives you a mark of some sort.
Perhaps.
I have theories about it.
I would love to hear your
theories. Because I've met others who have also died, and I knew, I don't want to go off track of you, but I knew when I sat down with these people, I looked around and I said, can I ask a really weird question? These are people I had just met, literally like 10 minutes earlier. I said, have all of you died at some point in your lives? And they all looked at me. They all didn't. It was at a party, and they all had said yes, every single one of them. And I knew it. I just knew it.
Wow.
I think it marks you. Just like when I saw you, I was like, this guy, there's something different about him. I think it marks you, at least to the people that have also died.
Wow.
But I don't know. I could just be insane.
No.
Okay, monastic
I love this
life.
theory. I love this theory. Monastic life. So yeah, I would go spend retreats and yeah, there is. So you have to. It stems from loving God, right?
So you're in practice of silence, or are there prayers, or is it something that you're eating and thinking of God and sleeping and thinking of God? What?
Sure. So monastic life in the Coptic Orthodox Church is different than what you would normally see on television, like that a Catholic, like Benedictine, like order would do, where they might practice a vow of silence for a period of time. They don't do that at this monastery. So the monastic rule is there's 3 rules. Celibacy, obviously, that's a given, right? Poverty, and obedience to your abbot father, your spiritual father. And your life is pretty much dictated in terms of you have a period of work where you're working, you're doing services in the monastery.
Father God or Father your mentor spiritually? It's
your spiritual mentor.
Got it.
Your father of confession.
Got it.
Yeah, an abbot, it's a father that you confess to, and then he gives you spiritual guidance. And so you show obedience to him. You show obedience to everyone else too in the monastery, in the community. Life is spent. You wake up at 5 a.m. to do prayers. After that, there's usually liturgy. You go to that. That's not every day, but on most days, like Wednesdays, Fridays, Sundays, you go to liturgy. Then you break fast with your other monks, and then after that, usually there's work that's assigned. If you're a monk, you already have probably a role or something you do that you. Some monks, work in the bookstore, selling books and resupplying the shelves.
You weren't going to school?
No, I was, but this was just during breaks. So winter breaks, summer breaks, that sort of thing, I'd go. So yeah, you'd have assigned work. Some monks, they do other tasks. And it varies, depending on whatever they assign you. And then after that, there's prayers. So there's the Coptic Book of Hours. You have to pray that at certain hours. So one of the monks will go and ring the bell, and you go to the church and you do the prayers. And so that's essentially your life. It's a life of sacrifice. It's a very difficult life. Some people think, it sounds like escapism, right? Like you're escaping the world and living this cozy life where you don't have to worry about rent and bills and
sex.
And that too, yeah.
Sex is complicated.
Sex is complicated. And yeah, you don't have a family to support. However, to be honest with you, if anyone thinks that, I challenge them to go try it. It's the most difficult life you could ever do. The absence of material things, enhances your spiritual life, but it also creates this hyper thought of like these attacks, these mental attacks where you start pitying yourself, wondering why you wasted your life like this.
Which this before going to the monastery, or this being in the monastery?
Being in the monastery.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you get attacks. Now, the attacks, the monks like to say that this is a spiritual attack. It comes from the devil. There's probably an equal balance of it, of demonic warfare, which they call unseen warfare, and mental, because you're alone, you're left to your thoughts. And that's why they assign you work. The work is to keep your mind busy and occupied, so you're not free to think.
Makes sense.
Because when you're idle, thoughts come in, and thoughts will, lead you to do things that you shouldn't be doing. Idle thought is a scary, can be scary for a monk.
I think for anyone. For
anyone, absolutely.
Yeah, left to our own devices, our minds can be quite cruel and unusual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought, well, you know what? I think this is what I'm going to do. Out of high school, I'm going to go and join this monastery. While
it was difficult, were you still finding the answers you were seeking about finding the goodness?
Yeah. Well, I was still not, my eyes were becoming more and more open to evil in the world. 9/11 sort of, like I said, was the catalyst for me to realize, the world's not this innocent fairyland. It's pretty scary,
People are jerks.
People are jerks. And so, to me, the sort of, the answer wasn't, I can fix this. At that age, I didn't think this can be fixed. I thought there's something much more evil. There's an evil force that's more powerful than people. And you have to understand, I thought it was demonic. To me, I thought, this is a demonic force. And the answer to it is not to fix the world, but it's rather to turn to God. So that was sort of my answer at 16. And so when I would go to the monastery, the yearning to live that spiritual life and to commit the sacrifice for God of renouncing the world, it grew stronger. My prayers and my Bible studies, they grow more fervent.
Are you turning away from your family or toward your family?
You technically at this point, granted, yeah, I was still with my family. I was still living at home.
But that they weren't in the same brain space as you. So that would separate you, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And they were against it. They didn't want me to go. Obviously, I'm the only son. The only son's a big deal in the Middle Eastern.
You have some sperm to get out there in the world.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, they want to have grandchildren.
Yeah, of course.
So there's that, right? They don't want me to leave. I have a duty to fulfill, and the duty is to take care of them in their old age. That's one. And then two, to pass on the family name. And I was like, no, this is not what I want. So the one caveat to you being a monk in the Orthodox Church is you need a letter of recommendation from your confessor father. And so I told my confessor father I want to be a monk. And he said, well, you can't do this out of high school. It's not possible. You actually need to go get a degree. And I was like, what's the point? It's like, I'm going to get a degree in something I'm not going to use.
Did he mean a theologian or no?
As anything, any degree. And to him, it was because of the sacrificial element. Because you can't just want to join a monastery for the wrong reasons, right? Like, they're testing you. So some people might want to join the monastery because they feel like I can't live in the world. But he's essentially saying, no, you need to get a degree. You need to show that you can live in the world. And you're sacrificing that choice to live with God. Exclusively with God. Because to live in a monastery, it's the full expression of living with God. here in the world, it's hard to live with God. You can, but you're distracted constantly. But over there, there's no excuse. It's the full expression of it. So when I got out of high school, I didn't really know what to study. I went to community college here in Los Angeles. And then I decided, out of community college, I'm going to transfer to seminary. And I went to seminary, and I got a degree in theology, because I was like, well, I don't want to, there's nothing else that I want to study.
Getting a degree in theology, to me, I think would be so cool, firstly. Did you then study other religions as well and find how similar they all are? And
yes. So, it's funny. At community college, I took a history of religions class. And luckily, best
class ever.
It's an awesome class. I love that class.
I love mine too.
But they mislead you a little. Like when I went to in Valley, they misled me a little bit. So luckily, I'm a very obsessed person. Like if I like something, I obsess study it. Like I'll study it day and night and really like obsess over it. So I was at that point, everything that the teacher was telling me, I was looking into it, because in her, the class was sort of curated to, I don't want to say undermine Christianity, but there was obviously the claims that within the Near Eastern faiths, there's a lot of similarities to the point where it seems like there's borrowing or stealing or plagiarizing.
I don't know. I think it was nice to help people assimilate to whatever situation they were in. They had to take the old gods and turn them into the new gods in order to make folks feel more comfortable or confident.
Yeah, perhaps,
Christmas being a great example.
Yeah, Christmas being a great example. And there is a lot of similarity, absolutely. But there was some misguidance. Like, I remember one of the ones, and I remember I even brought it up to the teacher, and I had evidence to back it, was she talked about Mithra, or she referred to him as Mithrist. You've probably heard of the story. Mithrist is a Sumerian god who, essentially his day of celebration is celebrated on December 25th. And he also has a virgin birth and that sort of thing. So it turns out a lot of the stories about Mithrist are not from the Sumerian narrative. It's really from the Roman adaptation of the story, which they don't call him Mithrist, it's Mithra. And Mithra comes after Christ. And yes, the only similarity is that December 25th happens to be, but the funny thing is the Orthodox don't celebrate December 25th. They celebrate a different date.
Right.
But it was the Romans who adapted the December 25th as the date, and it stuck. But so there is that. But so I told the teacher, a lot of what you're saying about Mithras, the Sumerians never said it. It was there's very little story. In fact, the only real things we know about him is he rides on a horse. There's sculptures of that. But.
And eventually he fought Godzilla. No, wait, that's Mothra.
That's funny, actually. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. But so I told her, a lot of what you're saying, it comes after Christ. It doesn't predate Christ. It was a Roman adaptation.
Did she listen to you?
She said she'll look into it. I remember I printed it out and gave it to her. But there was, there are
She's
narratives.
Like, this kid.
Yeah, there's a narrative. There's a lot of stories that are interesting. So, like, for example, one of the ones that really hit a chord with me, it wasn't like the Epic of Gilgamesh, because everyone quotes that one, right?
Sure, I do. I mean, the flood story.
The flood story. But the one that's probably interesting, you may have heard of this, it's actually, of the book Ecclesiastes in the Bible. So there is an Egyptian narrative, an Egyptian story called A Man Wrestles with His Ba. And Ba in ancient Egyptian means soul or spirit. And the story is almost a verbatim copy. The Egyptian fable is much older than the Hebrew one. The Hebrew one being attributed to Solomon, looking outside his balcony, seeing men toiling in the sun. The Egyptian narrative, it's, a king, a pharaoh who's looking out, seeing men toiling in the sun. It's almost so verbatim that they're even using the same language, but the only big difference between the two is in the Egyptian narrative, this pharaoh is contemplating suicide. He's thinking of jumping out of the balcony and saying, well, this life has no meaning. It's kind of like There's no real, like I could have been born into labor, but here I am born into royalty, and it's sort of like rolling the dice in a figuratively speaking. So he was saying, if I were to die right now, what's the purpose? Like, there's nothing. There's no purpose to life. Like, life is sort of meaningless.
It's arbitrary.
It's arbitrary. That's a good way to put it. But he doesn't do that. He decides that, there must be something still more to this. In the Hebrew narrative, obviously, that Solomon doesn't contemplate suicide. It's against religion. So, especially for someone revered as Solomon.
Well, that's the frustrating thing about people that say, the Bible is, firstly, the idea that they think white people wrote it. Secondly, the idea that these were snapshots for only one time period, without understanding that those stories go so far back, and that they're oral traditions that came along and got rewritten and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things. There's like this innate desire to worship, right? Worship a god, or to seek answers.
Or to turn away from one.
Or perhaps turn away from one.
Mm-hmm. Ego is I'm fascinated by the human ego.
Yeah.
When you speak of evil, I think of it as ego.
Yeah. Well, ego in the Eastern sense, that is something you have to curtail, and keep under control.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite all-time books is The Alchemist.
Oh, The Alchemist, yeah.
You read it?
Yeah, partially, not all of it.
Love that book.
I really like, speaking of religion and different religions, my favorite philosophy book is the Tao Te Ching. I think the copy I have is the Stephen Mitchell version. More gender neutral, surprisingly.
Okay.
Anyone who goes to seminary, they get exposed to scriptural criticism. So scriptural criticism, a lot of people who don't know how we get the manuscripts and the history of the manuscripts and how much plethora there is and the sort of evidence that supports it, might not totally, they might be biased towards, Christian scripture, Now granted, the Old Testament, there's certain things, like I mentioned, Ecclesiastes, that there's the Egyptian fable that sort of to me that's a strange one. That's a big anomaly. But when it comes to the New Testament's pretty strong in terms of the history of the manuscripts.
But still missing stuff. That we know there's things that are missing.
Like which?
Gnostics.
The Gnostic. As you know, the Gnostics there was a lot of heretical groups at that time. Besides the Gnostics, there was the Arians, and not to be confused with.
Right.
Which were fought. Now, theologically, a lot of these people were debated. And the Gnostics were a group that started producing works similar to that were being spread within the Christian church and becoming sacred in the Christian church.
Also, during Jesus' time, there was a person on that hill, and there was a person on that hill, and there was a person on that hill, and all of them saying, "I'm a savior." There was a lot of that going on.
There was, absolutely. In fact,
Monty Python does a good riff on that in The Life of Brian.
In fact, in the book of Acts, there's a very interesting story of Peter, when he was arrested, and they let him go. And one of the reasons why the Sanhedrin let him go, he said, because there's so many people claiming to be the Messiah. There was this guy Barnabas, and so many people claimed to be
handful of messiahs.
Yeah, there was a handful of messiahs, and they let him go, and they said, we're gonna let him go because if it's from God, you can't stop it. And granted, there were. And even Jesus said, there'll be many that come in this name. Now, for some reason, Jesus stuck. And I guess Christians look at it as it's divine. That element of it there's a divine element to Jesus's historicity and being able to stay within relevance and the extreme sort of conversion that occurred. That we view that as a divine element that sort of verifies and for us validates the faith. Now, granted, there were many people that claimed to be the Messiah, but for some reason, Jesus sort of surpassed those others. So seminary is biased, right? Because seminary we learn Christian theology.
Sure.
But I did try to look in other religions to the best of my ability, especially ones that were more predominant, like Islam and Judaism.
A few priests I've had conversations with who obviously have their doctorate in theology, they were very well versed in multitudes of religions, so
yeah,
at least the big three.
Yeah, it's because especially like those particular faiths I mentioned, they all have the same stories,
Yeah.
and they all
have a golden rule.
That's true. Yeah, they have golden rules that are very similar. A lot of them use even they have the same prophets, and but there is a difference, right? Obviously, because we don't follow that particular faith. But yeah, I love theology. I graduated in 2009, so it's been a long time since I really even talk theology.
Well, and obviously, yeah, I love it though.
I love theology.
It's so fun to talk about.
I don't talk with anyone about theology.
It's so much fun to talk about. As long as people aren't, don't get pissed or whatever when you're talking about it. I find it fascinating.
It is.
And also, none of us were there. So
that's true. If we had a time machine, we could go back.
It would be an interesting thing to go back to. But that's where faith comes in. That's the whole point of faith.
Absolutely.
And free will and all those good things. And I think the bottom line is, for some inexplicable reason, if there is a God, and I believe in God, but if there is or isn't, but if there is a God, and God has enough faith in us to believe that we'll come to know God. And no matter what you consider the starting of the universe to be, whether it was, God or just an inexplicable kaboom.
Yeah.
It doesn't change the fact that I wish people would just be better human beings.
I agree. Get
out of their ego's way. The ego being the devil.
Ego being the devil. That's an interesting way to look at it. The devil and pride is also another big element in Christianity, right? The devil instills pride. In fact, in the Orthodox sense, vainglory is looked at in a very, very negative light. And in monks especially, they have to, one of the attacks that the devil likes to use is pride and vainglory. And make it telling the monk, look how spiritual you've gotten and look what spiritual levels you've achieved. Because monks, and this actually leads to mind reading, by the way. In the Orthodox Egyptian Church, it is very common to meet someone who has gifts of the Spirit. Now, I went to a Reformed Christian seminary, by the way. I went to a seminary that was Pentecostal, where their gifts of the Spirit is speaking in tongues.
Sure, right? Which is so fascinating.
Which is really fascinating. I think, and when I was in seminary, I did a paper on the speaking of tongues. I actually really immersed myself in trying to do it. Because I actually believe that people who speak in tongues are being genuine. Like, they're being sincere about what they believe they can do. I just don't think the phenomenon is religious or its origins is of a divine nature. I think it's hypnotism. I think it's suggestibility.
I would argue for that.
Yeah, and
having watched it on the old television box, and to see that they do seem to be in an ecstatic hypnosis.
Yeah, it's a highly suggestible state. You're in there. They're playing worship music. Worship music excites the emotions, and in that state, it's expected. There's the expectation that if you have the Holy Spirit, you should be able to do this, and you are expected to do this. And the combination of those things brings that out.
Even the way the pastors touch the parishioners is very similar to how hypnotists touch people.
That's true. So I have a sort of belief that a lot of the faith healers that many people have seen on television, like Benny Hinn and a lot of these guys, they're really actually hypnotists. Now,
well, prayer is a form of hypnotism, right?
Absolutely,
and I think that I'm a big believer that prayer does work. I think that your brain is an ally, or the worst case scenario, right? Like we said before, your brain is either going to make your life a living hell, or it's going to help heal you, depending on your point of view.
Absolutely.
Big believer in that.
You actually said something that's very profound, because I believe in that too. And, hypnotism. So we could even talk about the history of hypnotism, because hypnotism is actually very older than Mesmer. It's as far as we know, the earliest that it's recorded was in ancient Egypt. But someone, if there is a creator, put it there. They allowed access into a part of your mind, which we call the subconscious mind. I actually believe it's by design. And the being that put that by design has infused that within religion.
Interesting.
Prayer there's something that Orthodox and Catholics do that after studying hypnosis, it made sense to me. When you pray, you stare up. The rolling the eyes up creates hypersuggestibility. And when you're done with a prayer, you actually seal the prayer with the sign of the cross. That brings you out of the suggestible state. And those elements are elements that we've come to pattern in hypnosis as this, because hypnosis is really the study of trance phenomenon. And trance phenomenon has been employed in cultures and civilizations, rural cultures as well, with fire dancing and
some surgeries.
Symbol. Yeah.
Way back when, they use it for surgeries.
They use it for surgeries. In fact, the doctor who was famous for it was a doctor from England called James Isdale. And he went to India. And because India did not have anesthetics, he would employ hypnotism. And he wrote one of the earliest books called Mesmerism in India. And that's how you know it's old, because it predates the term hypnotism. It was called mesmerism. And he was using it. And he discovered very interesting things about trance within the Indian culture that he could not achieve within a Western culture.
That's also very fascinating, and it's all about the belief systems of any given culture. You can incorporate that into making it work. And
the level of depth that they can go. They can go at a much greater level of depth.
Like the mystics, the Indian, just the dudes sitting on the side of the sidewalk.
Yeah, they have a name. I know.
I'm trying to think of the name.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the name too. Besides Guru or Guruji, there's another. But yeah, they can go to an extreme level of depth. And he discovered something called the Isdale state. And the Isdale state is a level of depth that you will probably as a hypnotist never experience. But if you do, there's an out. It's extreme level of hypnotism depth that the person does not come out of hypnotism. Where you tell them to come out and they don't listen to you because it's so euphoric that they want to stay in that state. To the point where their body becomes completely cataleptic. Like you can grab their arm and it will stay there forever. It's malleable. Their body's malleable. And James Isdale discovered that this state called he termed it as the Isdale state, but it's just an extreme level of depth where the person no longer responds to the hypnotist, and they will not pull themselves out. They will come out when they want to, but it's such a euphoric state that they choose not to.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and the solution to it was discovered by a 20th century hypnotist called Dave Ellman, who wrote about it he wrote one book on hypnotism, and it was just called Hypnotherapy. Dave Ellman was a stage performer, a stage hypnotist. He performed even on television in the 30s and 40s, and then he started being employed to teach dentists how to use hypnotism in the dental office for people who don't want anesthesia. And during one of his demonstrations with the dentists, he would do the circuits, like he'd be taken all over the country and he would do these talks and teach basic inductions to dentists that they could use. And during his demonstrations, he hypnotized one of the dental, watchers who just volunteered, and she went into the Isdale state, and he couldn't get her out. And he knew what the Isdale state was because he read the book. And he said he tried for a while to get her out. And he was starting to sweat. And then he realized a solution. And the solution was, he whispered in her ear, that if you don't come out right now, I will rig this so that you will never experience this state again.
And she pulled herself out. Wow.
Yeah. So that's a solution. So that's a solution to this.
Would she have recollection? Would a person have recollection of that euphoria once they're out of the trance, or is it something that can only be received in that moment of trance?
That's a good question. I actually don't know.
I wonder.
I don't know, because it's such a rare thing that it's not really... Like, I've never had anyone experience that in my practice. But I imagine it's a beautiful thing. I mean, that level of trance must be amazing.
Touching God, maybe.
Who knows? Maybe you're connected that way.
If the temple of God is within, then maybe that's what it is. You get down to the spiral center of the Tootsie Pop, and the answer is right there, you know? It could be.
The owl doesn't need to tell you that. That's
All right, so you're in a monastery. Obviously, you did not stay. What happened?
Yeah, that's good. So I tried for 10 years to try to be a monk.
Wow.
My father confession kept postponing. So I eventually went to seminary. That took 6 years.
Did you stayed a virgin all that time?
Yeah.
Wow, good for you.
Thank you. Don't worry, it didn't last that long after. Yeah, so, I tried, and my father confession kept pushing it back. And it was actually a very wise...
Pushing which back?
The letter of recommendation for me to go.
Oh, that father. Sorry.
Yeah.
Not your actual father.
Yeah, not my actual father. He wouldn't want me to go at all. So, yeah, my confession father, who needs to give me a letter of recommendation.
Did you say, what's the deal?
Yeah, we did have those discussions. And he told me, he's like, there's no rush.
Oh, interesting. He saw something.
Yeah, he knew, he was wise enough to know and discern that you have to, when you're that young, and you want to do something that is pretty much a lifelong commitment. This isn't like you're a Buddhist monk and you go and you do this thing for a number of years and you go back into the world. This is the rest of your life. Now, granted, there's a novice period to a monk. You don't just
like
become a monk.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, there's a novice. So novice periods could be quite a long time before you be a monk. He knew that I shouldn't rush into anything, that I should wait to really test these thoughts. And the way to test them is time. Give yourself time. There's no rush. It doesn't matter if you become a monk today or tomorrow or in 5 years. If this is what's meant for you, if this is what God's will is for you, you will do it. And I was stubborn. I wanted to do it. And I remember at one point, I learned the very valuable lesson, right? So some people might say you wasted 10 years of your life. And you went to seminary, you went to a school that you couldn't do anything with the degree, right? Which some people might say that.
I don't know. I think that's a cool degree personally, but I get what they're saying.
It's not a practical degree. But some people might look at it as I wasted time. But I did learn a valuable lesson. And the valuable lesson was I was forcing my will. And I wasn't really allowing God's will to be done. Mm-hmm. And when I really asked God in prayer, if this really is your will, then ease my way and help me be a monk. Show me. And if it's not your will, show me your will. Whatever your will is, I surrender. Just let me obey your will. And I remember shortly after I said that prayer, the next time I went to the monastery, I saw it with very different eyes. Like, it was almost like the spiritual curtains were removed. And I saw... Now, granted, the monastery is still very spiritual, but I saw it differently. Something felt different. And I knew the answer was either... there was either two answers. Either it was no, this isn't for you, or not yet. And so I gave up on the idea. And I went back into just figuring out what am I going to do next. And I turned to magic. And I turned to doing magic again. I got back into magic. I mean, I was always kind of doing that. Even when I was in seminary, I would still kind of do tricks for people and stuff.
How did it become hypnotism?
Sure, mentalism and hypnotism. So it was mentalism first.
Explain. I've had a mentalist on the show before, but just for the heck of it, explain what mentalism is.
Sure. So the thing is, mentalism is. I want to give it the fair explanation, but in order to do that, it's a little lengthier. But I'll try my best to shorten it. So mentalism, some people think it's another branch of magic. It really isn't. The magicians who say that don't know the history of mentalism. Mentalism has different starts. As far as we know, one of the earliest practitioners of something similar to what we call a mental act or reading minds or discerning a question to an answer, was in the 11th century by a Greek whose name was Alexander the Paphlagonian.
That must have been hard to put on his business card.
Right? Yeah. Big tab. He had a big tablet.
Yeah.
And is Alexander the Paphlagonian, the mental marvel? No, I was kidding.
Esquire.
But yeah, he was, and we only know his story because he had a critic, a guy named Lucian, who watched him perform a mental effect. That's the best way to describe it, where essentially he would have a group that would gather around a fire, and they would, one of the members of the group would write a question to a question that they needed an answer for on a parchment. He would fold it, he would rip it and put it in the fire, and the smokes would rise up and an answer would be given. And Lucian said this guy is secretly somehow able to see the information. So he was kind of like the James Randi of his time, right? So he was one of the very first that we know of. And then later on, there was an Italian by the name of Joseph Panetti, who did the earliest type of act, which is called a two-person mental act, and he did it with his son, where his son would be blindfolded on stage, and you've seen this act. It's been popularized now by many people, like on America's Got Talent, the clairvoyants, and have done it on the. Panetti would go out into the audience, and people would hold random articles, and the son, who was blindfolded, would somehow telepathically, in communication with his father, without much words being said, is able to say what the objects were and the names of the people. After Panetti, there was another two-person act by one of the very he's known as the modern day father of magic, a gentleman named Robert Houdin, a Frenchman. He also did the two-man mental act. It was called a two-person act because it required two people, obviously. But mentalism had another start, right? So it had these weird starts that all kind of culminated. Is it observation? It's a variety of things. And I would say that that just like magicians, we're not at liberty to of course, to discuss. No. But it employs a variety of it's whatever information you can give us, we will take it. That's really the sure. But on just subtle levels, from my understanding, I saw the In and of Itself. Oh yeah, Derek Delgadio. He's amazing. Yeah, he's amazing. So good. He's awesome. So then mentalism had another really interesting spawn of a start through the spiritualist movement. Yes. Which you've heard of, I'm sure, the Fox Sisters, and Daniel Day Hume, and a lot of these early spiritualist movement mediums. And so from there we get the one-man mental act. Now, some people would like to say the Davenport brothers started a stage presenting spiritualism on stage, but they weren't a mental act. The first mental act was a guy named John Randall Brown, who, very sadly, that most mentalists don't even know the name. But he's the first one-man mental act. Prior to that, it was a two-man act, generally. But with him, it was a one-man deal, and he actually died in an unmarked grave. Kind of a sad ending, and there was a point in his life where he was so famous that I think a column wrote about him and said he has the American people grabbed by the neck because he was so. It was such a unique form of entertainment. Now, most one-man mental acts professed psychic abilities. So they profess, I'm reading your mind, this is what I'm doing. Do you believe in psychic ability? This is the funny thing. So most magicians and mentalists you might meet will say no, that it's all BS. I like to fancy myself as an amateur parapsychologist because I study it independently. And I say yes, there is. Me too. I believe there is, absolutely. And I could even reference a lot of stuff because I love that. I love looking into this stuff. But yeah, so early one-man mental acts, they claimed psychic phenomenon, psychic ability. From John Randall Brown, you had imitators, people who came after, who copied him. One of them was his manager, who was also the manager of a very famous one-man mental... Well, I don't even want to say man, because she's a woman. A one-woman mental act, a really famous person Her name was Anna Eva Faye. And she was so popular that Houdini was jealous of the amount of shows she was booking constantly. Huh. She was filling in theaters.
Good for her.
When sometimes some of his theaters weren't as packed, you know. So Anna Eva Faye claimed realism too. She claimed to be real. She, as far as we know, she wasn't. Later, she professed she was just tricks. And in fact, her manager, a guy named Washington Irving Bishop, he exposed her. He was her manager. He was involved in a romantic relationship with her. Then
Classic.
Something happened where they split. He started exposing her act, and his show became Expose.
Oh, wow.
An expose show, which...
He was the first magic Jerry Springer.
Sort of, yeah, I guess you could say that, yeah. And there were people doing expose spiritualist acts, and so he was trying to capitalize on the success of that. Then he managed John Randall Brown, and then he started stealing his act. And then he started touring the world because he started realizing, you know, maybe other people haven't seen this act in other parts of the world. And then karma got him because one of his managers, when he was in England, a young lad, helped him and copied his act.
God, it's a very unscrupulous
Stuart Cumberland, yeah,
kind of situation, this magic world.
It is. It's just like comedy and a lot of things. People will copy success, right?
Yeah.
They'll see the dollar signs and...
I read The Prestige.
I could do that.
It's a great book.
Yeah, oh yeah. The book and the movie is fantastic.
Yeah, they're very different.
Yeah, they are, yes. But that context, right, of competition within magic and wanting to outdo the other and succeed brutal.
And
be it's brutal, and it still exists, you know, and it existed in the one-man mental act. Somewhere along the line of the turn of the 20th century, magicians started adapting mental effects.
And this interested you.
Yeah, so most magicians who you find will do mentalism, or most mentalists you find today started doing magic, which I'm of the same caliber.
You started with mentalism and then went to magic?
No, I was...
Because you learned magic as a kid, but when you started performing, what were you doing?
Sure, yeah, so I did magic when I was a kid, but I was an amateur.
Yeah.
When I took up mentalism, it was around 2008, and it was because I was sort of... You know, it's funny, when I was a kid, a lot of the stuff that would intrigue me was not the sleight of hand making things disappear. It was actually you're going to think of a color, and I'm going to tell you what color you're thinking.
Orange.
You know, yeah. I love orange, but it's one of my favorite colors. It's my favorite color, too. Oh, my God. I'm not kidding you. It's my favorite color. But I didn't realize I was doing like a mental magic. But I was I guess when in 2008 I kind of realized this is what I actually like. So I started looking into mentalism and got really like bit by the bug, I guess you can say, and really became a mentalist, like completely devoted to that. And then at some point when you do a mentalism act, you have to make a decision. And the decision is, am I a mentalist who's just like a magician, just employing tricks on stage? Or can I tap into something real? And when you start going into that area, you start getting into more hypnotism and things like that. So hypnotism is almost like the next thing that you learn as a mental. Not all mentalists learn hypnotism. It's only the ones who really want to start doing this stuff in a much more on real terms.
Yeah.
As opposed to employing, deception like a magician would.
Can we do one?
Yeah.
Okay, what do we have to do?
Do you want to do the experiment I did for you? You know, that experiment works better.
That will work good for people that can't see us, that are just listening.
That's a good question. Do you want me to get a name of someone you're thinking of?
That'd be cool.
Sure.
All right.
You know, remember
I feel like I'm making you like dance.
No. You know Alexander the Paphlagonian, right? I mentioned he would take parchment. I want you to think of a name, Susan. It could be anyone.
Okay.
Someone, obviously, that you have not mentioned the name to me.
Right.
No one that I would know. And whoever you're thinking of, write their name on the line and close it like a book.
Okay.
I'll look away, I promise.
Okay. First name.
Good. You know, another thing he would do, like I mentioned, is he would take the paper. Yeah, I don't want you to think I'm looking at it.
No.
If I fold it again, I can't see it.
That's correct.
But I would rip it, too. Because if I rip it, at this point, it exists in your mind. Because all I needed you to do is to write it down.
Right.
The act of writing locks it in your mind.
Right.
Now, granted, it exists in the papers, but For that, I probably need to tape it or put it together like a little puzzle. And are you right-handed or left-handed, Susan? I never asked you.
Mostly right, but I'm both.
You're both.
Yeah.
And could I ask you to also stand up too?
Yeah.
Let's do this thing. And you said you're right-handed, yes?
Yeah.
A little
basically,
bit of both.
Yeah.
Open. I want you to open your hand. And this is someone you're really close to, yes?
Yeah.
Family. No, it's a friend.
It's a friend,
But
but
it could be family.
you know how it is with friends.
Yes. I'm going to rip the rest of the papers. I can't see anything. Open
No.
your hand. Can you see anything?
No.
Keep your hand closed.
Am I
Is it okay
thinking
if my
of the
hand-
name?
Yeah, think of the name very carefully in your mind.
Okay.
Female friend. Your friend Jill.
Shit! How did you do that? That's so crazy! He nailed it! What? Makes the hair stand up on my arm. That's
fun.
so wild. Very cool.
Thank you. You know, the one thing I want to do a takeaway here just to say, you know, the real objective in doing a mental act or a magic act is to leave people with mystery.
Yeah.
It's to give them that feeling of mystery, like how, you know, because
That is exceptional.
it's that's the what we're trying to put on the platform is mystery. That's what we're trying to elevate.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the things that mentalists, people who don't really, I guess the word I'm looking for is don't understand what we do. They might conscrew us with someone who's trying to cleanse your aura or you know, tell you that you have this negative, like this curse on you and you need to, we
Pay
can
them
remove it.
$1,000.
Correct. Yeah. And we don't, that's not what we do. What we do is a theatrical mystery performance. And in one of the most famous mentalists of the 20th century, who is still with us, thankfully, he's been going through some medical issues, is a gentleman named Max Maven. Now his real name, he had a real name prior, but it's Max Maven now. That's his name. And he says that mentalism, or his definition of magic, mentalism, is the artistic exploration of mystery. That's how he defines it. And I think that's a beautiful definition.
That is a beautiful definition.
Yeah.
Yeah. This has been great. I don't want to keep you all night. It's already so late, but this has been so cool. Tell people how to find you both. So you do hypnotherapy for people.
I do.
For doing all sorts of things to help them with all sorts of issues.
Yeah.
Long list.
There is a long list, you know, as long as obviously it's within the scope of hypnosis. And the scope of hypnosis is anything that is a vocational, avocational self-improvement. That's the actual medical, that's the actual, to be a licensed hypnotherapist. That's the statement that we have to stay within those guidelines, that it's vocational or avocational self-improvement. Meaning if there is some sort of condition that a psychologist would need to look at, I would not be able to touch it.
Oh, can you hypnotize me to not kill people?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Precisely.
Right. Got it.
And I do stage hypnotism. I do stage mind reading. I mix the two, so I'll do stage mind reading and hypnotism in the same show.
Tell people how to find you.
I have a website. It's themastermentalist.com. If you look up my name...
Is it the Master Mentalist or it's the mastermentalist.com?
Sure, it's themastermentalist.com.
Okay, good. Because sometimes it's...
Yeah, that's true.
It's important to notice which one's which. Yeah.
And if you look up my name, Nader Hanna, mentalist on Google, you'll see Yelp, and I have a lot of reviews.
Yeah.
You can reach out to me.
It's a great show. I can attest.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Susan. I appreciate that.
I could tell you were special.
Thank you. Oh, you're kind. You know, one of the other things, another beautiful statement that performers like to say is there's an art to being an audience. Oh. Not everyone knows how to be an audience, and you are a terrific audience. And I think it's because you yourself are an artist. You're a performer. You're I don't want to say illustrator. You're a painter. You draw, and you have so much different forms of art that you express in the various trades that you do. And so it takes someone with an artistic expression themselves to appreciate someone who's also expressing themselves in a different art.
And a curiosity, perhaps.
I
like to think that I have a childlike sense of wonder, and so that everything is exciting and interesting to me. And so when I go to see performances like that, I don't care if someone is deceiving me. I just want to be I want to be there in the moment and enjoying it. I think that's really cool. But you took it next level for me. I was like, no, something's up here.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
The suspension of disbelief, it's what you experience when you read a good book or a movie.
Totally.
Or watch a good mystery performance, like a magic show or a mind reading show or a hypnotism show.
So I have to ask, did you find the answer you were seeking about the good versus the evil of the world?
Yeah, I did. The answer is never definitive, right? Like, I think the answer evolves. Mm. But currently my stance on it is there's a lot of beautiful things in the world, and you can choose to look at the world and only see the evil, which will cause depression and anxiety and all these other things, or you can choose to focus on the good. And if you focus on the good, there's plenty of it. And I just choose to focus on the good. I'm aware of the evil, but I don't let that, I'll tell you a really nice, just a quick thing my father in confession told me that has stuck with me for a while. And that is, thoughts are like birds that land on your head. You can't stop them from landing on your head, but you can prevent them from making a nest.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I think life is a lot, we choose what our minds sort of take in, the information takes in. And if we take in a lot of negative things, it starts to, affect our emotions.
Absolutely.
And stuff. And it's not good. It's not healthy.
No, I 100% agree with that. Thank you, Nader.
Thank you, Susan. This was great.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye. Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks. Bye.